Hello, everybody. We'll be starting soon. Hello, everyone. A very good morning to all of you. On behalf of IUDI, I would like to welcome you all to day two of Infinitum 2.0, hosted by the Global Group of Institute of Urban Designers India. Thank you all for tuning in today. I'm Akanksha Vakhare, and I will be your host for this morning. I'm an urban designer currently based in Abu Dhabi and associated with a Boston-based firm, CPT Architects. I've been working on urban planning and design projects across the Middle East, Africa, and India, and have been engaging with a wide range of contexts and scales. To begin with, please join me in welcoming Brinda Shastri, Additional Vice President of IUDI, to formally open today's session. Over to you, Brinda. Brinda, we cannot hear you. Are you there with us?
Yeah, am I audible now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Akansha. And hello, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the Institute of Urban Designers India, that is IUDI's webinar, Infinitum 2, Co-Creating Cities. I'm Brinda Shastri, Acting Vice President of IUDI, and I'm delighted to introduce the session for the day. A little bit about IUDI. IUDI is hosting this webinar to celebrate its annual foundation day, which was on June 1st, 2007. Ever since, we have been having a whole set of new members. We are over 700 members now across 13 chapters and centers, including a global group, which is the organizer of today's event. We also have 6 institutional members who have joined us to further our cause of advancing the field of urban design. Yesterday, we had some very enlightening presentations and discussions on 2 themes, co-create and connect. And just to give you a little recap on what happened yesterday, in the first session, when speaking about creating pathways and setting goals for collaborative processes and co-creation of designs, our eminent speakers debated and theorized on the practice and education of urban design. Some of the messages which were really loud and clear were as follows. Co-creation and sharing of traditional, cultural, and environmental knowledge is critical when developing sustainable practices in historic urban landscapes. Urban design is not an act of singularity, but a collective one. Urban design cannot be divorced from politics. Design is a political process. Contextual complexity and contradiction in a city is necessary. It generates debates and makes you think. An urban designer is a generalist, a bridge maker, who is faced with the challenge of integrating the qualities of community life into design. The dialogues were very engaging and it needs to continue. In the second session on Connect, we had presentations by 4 speakers, which raised provocative debates on the use of data and scientific methods in the design of our cities. Some of the points discussed include metropolitan urbanism can be understood through methods or cartographic tools, which can develop a systemic vision that combines architecture, ecology, infrastructure, and society. Data-driven methods, when used to quantify intangible, subjective, urban experiential qualities, provide designers with different ways of seeing the city, helping them to reposition their perspectives. Designing simultaneously for physical, social, economic, and digital connections have a multiplier effect that can catalyze development for the benefit of the local community. And lastly, integrating traditional knowledge into contemporary design processes helps root them into the local community. So these were some of the messages. And if you have missed these sessions, you can view them on IUDI's YouTube channel. So coming to today, we are excited to welcome our distinguished panelists, the IUDI Council members, and all the registered participants to yet another set of sessions on urban design for resilient, inclusive, and sustainable futures. In the first session, Create, our panelists will present their thoughts on collaborative design using co-created methods and tools that help transform visions into actionable urban solutions. In the second session, Catalyze, our panelists will highlight how systems, policies, and practices can generate co-created ideas to shape the design of resilient cities. So we look forward to some thought-provoking discussions after these presentations. So once again, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us today. Over to you, Akanksha.
Thank you, Brenda, for the brief recap and insight to today's sessions. Like you mentioned, this session will deep dive into mainstreaming collaborative urban design, showcasing co-design tools and methods that turn collective visions into actionable urban solutions, with a special focus on cases from Asia. We'll hear today from our panelists, Luciano Landetta, Sandhya Rao, Kritika Shah, and Manushi Jain, followed by a moderated discussion and a Q&A session. So please post all your questions in the chat box throughout the session and we'll take them up at the end. Before we start, I would kindly request you to all switch off your mics. And without any further delay, I would like to welcome our first speaker for the session, Luciano Landetta. Luciano is the co-founder at Burbano, Bureau for Urban Opus. He has over 25 years of global experience in architecture and urban planning and has led transformative projects across the regions of EU, MENA, Asia, and America. His leadership spans renowned studios like Santiago Calatrava, Stephen Hall, Woods Bagot, and City Meta Lab, with a focus on sustainable, future-proof city design. I'll hand it over to you, Luciano.
All right. Can you guys hear me well? Sound a little bit here. Yes? Okay, cool.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. I mean, thank you for making space, and I'm absolutely feel honored to be part of this panel. It's not only an honor, but actually, I like what the previous words were saying about provoking conversations. I'm a little bit before I can share some of the slides that I just put it today. I'm an architect actually by nature. I've been doing practicing for 27 years, almost 30 years. And happens to be a little bit of anecdotes in the trajectory of professional and academics that I was embracing a lot of large-scale architectural projects, right? From Stephen Hall in China or even in America, where I started in New York City. And without knowing, to be very, very honest, without knowing that will take a little bit of the considerations of later on in the career. Such as like public space, right? Something that we all take for granted. Urban planning was a little more based on codes, local codes, international codes, regulations right away, and quite a lot of technical. I wouldn't say it was not necessarily to discuss about the planning, but the city as the topical discussion that we see today. Knowing the city, like session one yesterday, for example, that we're talking about. So is a living, developing, never-ending entity. I mean, the city, that's a little bit something that I want to talk today. But that was confronting a little bit the role of the architecture in the city, right? You get a plot, you get a lot of like stakeholders, developers, city, investors, capital, people, community. But that I would say like 20 years ago, that was actually something separate in a silo, in a separate bucket, in a lab, if you will. The fact that things were growing in size and growing in complexity, other topics came into the board. How do you arrive to this building? Why do you arrive to this building? Why this spot over here in this corner is actually more successful or has more attraction than exactly identical plot next door? Which of the factors that are not necessarily tangible, visible, or in consideration to the design that I was participating towards to? And I'm talking about skyscrapers, airports, you call it ports, a quite large footprint of the building. So in New York, we were doing a lot of domestic, as we call it in the US, domestic work. Denver, Miami, Indiana, Buffalo, New York State, etc. And later on, I think which is a little bit what I'm bringing today, later on, high diversified and diversified at the same time ecosystems such as China. We were embracing, when I was in Stephen Hall, one of the largest developers still active called Ke in Shenzhen, at the border with Hong Kong. And that building was a headquarter. It's understood as a horizontal skyscraper, right? So it's a building that spans almost for like 800 meters long. But that was planted the seed for the um, impact for the territorial area. So how does it possible that one building, a little bit like when I was working in OMA in the Seattle Library, one building brings absolutely brand and change the whole spectrum of the dynamics of the city. That's when I like scratch my head, like, oh, this is something beyond my knowledge at the moment. Um, this is something I have to put in a pair of glasses. It's like I'm not seeing the invisible phenomena of the urban dynamics. That's somehow that triggers. I also worked with Perkinismans in New York City for quite a while. And the fascination of that is a territorial between the two circles of urban space and architectural in synergy. And that what triggers the whole thing on, oh, this is my somehow highlight as a planning activity, right? So it's not a separate entity, has nothing to do necessarily 100% with all regulations and city plannings and the role. And what is my role as a co-creator of the city, which is a little bit the title of today in Infinitum 2.0. Co-creating is co-participating. So in co-creating, it's understanding that leaving behind that role of an architect of the entity that has a great idea. And I work with all these firms that has a singular signature for Santiago, Fluxus and stuff. Beautiful, but it's much more a responsibility of others. And multidisciplinary became to be part of the lexicon, for example, right? So who am I listening to? What am I looking at? And on top of that, and it's not about my personal or professional experience, but it's about what happens around it. I'm talking about the span of 20 years now. I detected that 50 years and 10 years when it happens to work in China for 7 years. It's like, oh, there's a culture element here also. What's a square in Mexico City, the Zocalo, has nothing to do with the square in China and Shanghai, Renmin Guangzhou, the public, how the people integrates into that. It has a lot of political events, how it gets restrained about the public, the notion of public, for example, which is quite different. Or, for example, how does it happen in the Nordic area in Europe? What the Swedish might have for understanding, for example, there's the common ground and the common place is also accessible to others. So it has a political content. I know yesterday you guys were talking about that. This is Peter Bishop. Like there's a lot of political notion that the city has a governance, and then we have a role into that. Boom, alas, we now we enter into actually quite deep waters on articulation of what I call the decoded elements of the phenomenon of the urban phenomenon. What is that? So I'm just going to share, if you allow me, to share some of the screens. It's not too many slides, but a little bit just to steer the conversation. Let me know if you see the screen to you. Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. So let's move forward. So the urban decoded opportunities is what I might actually synthesize as a 20 something years of identify simple things. It's linked to Lynch, is linked to how do you really see the invisible things happening. Seizing the city dynamics has been something I'm pursuing. What is the definition of a city? What's city settlements phenomena, infrastructure phenomena, urbatecture? I'm just going to talk about that later on in urban realm, right? So each one of them. So going back to this definition of the city has to be with the settlements and each one of the regions that we are living and working and related to culturally speaking are in the settlements definition. What is that thing that we call the city? And we are in the era, I think, of the 2000s. The mega city is a concept that we all embrace quite naturally. Like we have densities, we have flux, we have infrastructure, we have metros, and a lot of areas of density. AFAR, for example, is quite technical. But what is that in reality? How do we get ourselves exposed to such a level of is it maneuver our daily life as citizens in these areas and definition. So the city definition, it might vary, it might change, and I don't want to, this is not a lecture about that, but this is something that we really have to understand in the diversity. When you specifically saying you work in Abu Dhabi, and you were saying like, how does it put yourself, like, you have to be a good observer. You have to be very humble. You really have to keep in silence, and you have to see day and night and summer and winter and how things actually related into the physicalities of that. I'm trying to see between like Italo Calvino, what happens in the visible cities? How many cities do we have in one city, for example? What's a settlement phenomena? Like, how do we get within the same city sub-districts, right? So we're very used to a little like Anglo and American and British notion of suburbs, right? But it's much more than that. How, like I was saying in the very beginning, like one building or one part or one corner or one function or one bus station or one etc. determines the activity in the radius. And with people, we get an approach. I have one anecdote here. When I was living in New York, I was taking a car and driving 6 hours south to Virginia and etc. And on the way back, I was seeing like the more and more present, invisible presence of you go in a gas station, convenience store, you get a mug of New York City. The closer you get in, more mugs, more shirts, more souvenirs about New York. So this anticipation of the grand metropolis was coming, even miles away from that. It's like, oh, so there's a sentiment and an emotional feeling of epicenter and the physicality of that. And that tells you that people that are embracing not only buildings by itself, but also embracing functions that we have. The infrastructure phenomena that has been discovered myself, like um, for example, Chinese cities has been developed in the last 10 years based on the provision of infrastructure, right? So a metro station, a multifunctional or multimodal transportation hub, like it, for example, happens in the district of Hongqiao on the western side of Shanghai. First, the train station appears, then the district name. So they have this understanding that mobility was primarily one of the developer entities across the whole spectrum of stakeholders and decision makers. So it was kind of like the opposite in Europe, like vicinities of the train station were actually somehow the value were decreasing. It was like outskirts of that. It was abandoned. Here's actually the opposite. The benefit of being connected is a social value in the development. And out of the sudden, that district that has this Hongqiao 22 platforms and ended up being as a district of hyper diversified landscape and land use, right? So you have conference centers, you have community centers, you have retail centers, etc. So the infrastructure phenomena is something that we are facing now. Like people are now willing to get into mobility. And urban architecture is that what I was somehow framing a little bit in my intro. I'm going to be very quick here on what is that role of the architecture in the urban context, really contextualize what we do. It happens that I mean, moving forward in my profession, the research, like some of the projects that I'm doing at the moment are not necessarily architecture related, and somebody else is going to finish. So like, I think yesterday, Anoma was saying like you get the setup for the city to happen. You plan the city for years to come and has nothing to do with the gentrification. It's nothing to do with like you rescue the values on the local values and maximize it, right? So, and that urban realm, that's a little bit of, we're going to talk about that later. So I'm just going to go quickly. I live, it happens that in the last 6 years I've been living here in the city of Rome that we have, we all know either by books or visiting interconnected spaces, right? So this area, which is called the Campo Marzio, the foundational imperial Rome, and later on the Renaissance, the Baroque Rome, is based on the interconnection of spaces, right? So those Piazza Navona, you call it Fontana di Trevi, etc. But it is more in the trajectory or the promenade that you go through in the city, either as a visitor, tourist, or as a person that lives in, that makes that complexity, but also at the same time, you call the city by your name and by the space. So that emotional relation to that space that David Lynch was somehow related in the book on creating the landmark, creating the mental state of connection with that. Like Piazza Navona, for example, is that a container, but at the same time is that catalyst that allows people to go across, and you determine that as a coordinates in the city. It's very flat, but at the same time, open space creates activation and creates a phenomena of density of congregation, right? As you see in this slide. There are other different configurations and etc. But I wanted to just quite simple jump into this one, right? So just skip one. There you are. So this is a project that very quickly, to put it in context, this is one of the challenges that we have. I hope you can see my screen better. There you are. So, um, so it's going to be here. I'm jumping slides just to give an image of what that also as a theory has been put it in practice, right? So you've seen a lot of these projects. All right. Okay. So there you are. Okay. And I'm going to close with this one in 1 minute. So challenges are like as a somehow sharing with you these beautiful theories of how do you see them observed. But I'm just going to get three elements that somehow goes across of the things I want to share with you. Mobility. What is that thing? What is that perception of senses of arrival, for example? What do we see? How does the city really get stitched? It's mostly pedestrianized rather than vehicular access and etc. Even though you have a transfer mode, that you drop your car or your public transportation. At the end game of embracing the city as a phenomena is us as individuals and groups of individuals getting to the place. So in us, because we have a certain speed and we have a certain human perception, but also we have an integration of what do we see, right? So that sense of arrival is not a physical only entity, but like, for example, this is one of the challenging projects that we had. And I just want to share with you the most important slides on the project. The most important discovery was this one. 1 kilometer away from that piece of land that we were asked to do a chopping mall, there was nothing. So there was kind of a living area, a cluster of nothingness, and people just go to work and go back to their homes. And there's a cycle of emptiness. I mean, if you don't have what happens in between your life, you feel like empty. So this is one of the most dense districts in southwest Shanghai, called Minhang. And the last empty land available there, they call it the park, but it happens to be it was just a simple piece of grass with no articulation. And what we try to defeat the sense of like, what if the park happens to be a little more active? What if we get porosity here? What if we allowed neighbors to go? I don't know if you can see this, might be a very small in here, but what if we don't block the view? What if the development happens to be from the bottom up? Right? So what if we get this ground level activation that you can see a little bit of this test that we have over here and see how does it let. So we map a little bit like how people were towards to the community to the bus stop that was on the other side. What was this thread that naturally people just walking towards still, and that somehow gives us a clue on maybe that fragmentation is something that can be perpetuated and in the development. We, for the first time, we never actually do that, and it's not common in China. Community participation in that sense. Somebody has, so that was give you a pile of, I would say, layers of activation. One is pedestrianized development as a departing point. FAR will face it later on. That was one of the major challenges. Like I have a private developer and we have infrastructure, and then we have a community, but then we insisted quite a lot that nothing of this is going to be in the long run successful if we don't take care of the daily basis activation of the land, meaning people, right? So how people's going to walk through that, and we might came with this a little bit challenging idea that the development needs to be a little bit sunken. So when you enter here and the greenery cover as a carpeted green of that, and then under that, I think we have a section under that, you have the development. So this is a little bit of the rival. So you create a sense of compactness at the same time with a little between 11 or 50 meters, learning from other cases in the world, Ramblas in Barcelona, etc. People feel comfortable to be with. So the second consequence of that is frontage activation, right? So how many nodes, how many steps actually go from one point to another. Northwest was databases like in this here, people would just arrive into their house and leave in, but east-west was probably more entertaining, leisure experience that people embrace it. So this literally the dynamics on the graphics and the diagrams, like how do we engage with people to get this kind of like a natural cut in between and the building's natural will place. Later on, I'm not going to bore you guys, like how do we place FAR, et cetera, et cetera. But it was a journey on getting only one and only premises of critical premises of development over here. So then we face all the range of technicalities, sun exposure, wind, and noise, etc. But it remained. It actually this is a little bit of the section that we have here, but rather than just showing the project, I just want to show the result. Like, and people is embracing that there's a sunken part that, and that's a little bit like what we feel like we 100% accomplished that. Yeah. Um, so I'm just gonna very quickly, guys, in other ways. Yes. In
पीछे की जाना घुमा रहा हूँ अच्छा वो जा रहा है लगता है हाँ बट उन लोगों ऊपर आया कोई गया है
Luciano, we cannot hear you. I think you're on mute. I would
how about
request
now?
everyone to kindly switch off their mics, please.
Okay, no worries. In synthesis, I don't want to stop here. It's a collection of projects, but the winner here was the ground floor and the activation of that pedestrian environment, right? So like, and buildings, I'm not against that. Remember, we're coming from very spectacular firms and etc. But buildings are the background of our life. If you have that as a premise, and then the winner will be the open space and the common space. I'm happy to share this with you. I think Devaya and I, we were like colleagues at that point when we participated in BDP. This is a similar urban operation. There's a large competition happening in Shanghai, and kind of like the same concept we apply. We have a park and in this edge. This green area was an industrial port at the edge of the Huangpu River, one of the most busiest ones, and defines the city between Pudong and Puxi. And the transformation happens to be very simple move, like let's put the greenery in one of the edges, waterfront gets rescued from the people access. And the second tier, which is this strip, what we call the green belt, happens to be with the new development was. So it was strange because we get commissioned to get buildings, but in reality, we were commissioned to test a little bit urban guidelines, right? So for example, the height of the buildings, the level of reflection of the buildings and material, and how does the ground floor get permeated, like get treat a little porosity that allows one, you see the very tall residential buildings on the right hand and the waterfront. So we were basically in the middle. We have to be smart enough to understand once again as we start the conversation
design
is going through is going to mobilize and create an anchor ship. So how do you, one of the questions that I was listening yesterday, like is you cannot please everyone, but you have to be very smart. And when you have this planning, like who's the winner of your whole intervention, right? Is that, of course, the people? Is that the city bringing a public space? Is that giving the city 1 square meter of greenery, 1 square meter of a gathering space is already a home run, is already a good thing. So if that was the critical premises rather than the building, what we did, we twist, really, we create that kind of like a circumstances. These are the initial renderings. How does the plot was not working linearly, but working perpendicular, right? So like towards to the water. And how do you create intricacy? How do you create interest? How do you create navigation through? How do you create spots? And we activate. That's why the podiums are a little bit independent from the towers. And the second rail, I put another hat. If you just try to working with the developers, this is pre-COVID era. The buildings were necessarily get a new type of program within. I mean, we work in the offices, 9 to 5 or even more areas, and we need to be smart enough. This is like 2015, 10 years ago. We needed to know how people actually going to gather in the breakout spaces. So the lower part of the buildings were between food and beverage and all these things and convenience stores, etc. But more importantly, spaces to create interaction between you working, right? So the green axis, as I call it here, we fragmented the building, we challenged a little bit the FAR and create the same massing, and the buildings were trying to recreate a little bit one element around, less elements, more space experiences, the renders that we have. Ground floors, again, were activated. This is a little bit the diagram that triggers that. We have a private jet for the headquarters. We have a park. What happens is how do we unite all these buildings within the floor? So blah, 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 of architecture, blah. We have a building that somehow we're embracing the connection with the ground floor, right? So you get lift up, it's somehow allowing a little like a public passage into it. It's part of the process of that. There you are. So, and creating balconies within the mass and that maximize the view towards the river. But at the same time, so it's just one simple building that has this interaction in the ground floor, more or less, right? So again, if the previous exercise was recreating a little bit like how to create the community access, this has pretty much the community access towards to the main interest, which is the waterfront, and so on and so forth. I don't want to actually just bother you with all the projects, but I want to get another one that is in here. Yeah, so I have, let's see if I have it. So this is another one in Sanya, the south of China. Most of this is actually China because I was talking about density. And the sketch that you have in your right hand was a little bit reclaiming the industrial port of Sanya was very polluted, and the developer wants to get, my son is here, contaminated. The developer wants to get a little bit access to the waterfront. So how do we create, again, access from the city? Most of these projects have this common denominator on bringing flows or bringing functionality or bringing activity around the development. So one of the major challenges was not only unleash the potential of the site, but also created a dynamic. We have a kind of like a skyscraper. We have a multifunctional, this a little bit dome here. At the very beginning was a hotel, and we decided to be a conference center and kind of like a shopping mall. So how do we create activities rather than that will bring and accelerate the flow between elements and recreate again, once again, the waterfront with all the people in the community coming over. So it was a large scale. I'm increasing scale now. It was a large scale frontages. It was kind of like walking in the park type of the concept, right? The Sanya is very humid, 83% humidity, and at summertime, but it's also kind of like tropical or subtropical weather. So walking under the shadow was the premise, and recreating a sub-city that was kind of like a shadow network type of here. You see like there's a coverage. This green was kind of like a hover over the whole activity in pedestrian wise, and some of the residentials were seated on the pond. So like you can gradually will filter towards to the water to get this waterfront activated, etc. And so I want to share with you another of, so it will be very quickly. 1 second. Yeah, allow me to go here. Highlighted. Okay, cool. There you are. Oh no, is this one? Sorry. Okay, there you are. So when we changing latitudes, this is another of the challenges. It's not about the architecture. In Dubai, in the South Dubai, there was a competition that we won 6 years ago, so 8 years ago, to develop an Al Maktoum airport, kind of like hybrid between a commercial center and an exhibition expo. You may scratch your head like, how does it have to be with planning? But remember buildings as a seed of transformation. In this area, which at the moment is nothing, the South Dubai Authority wants to have an activity that will provide economical, let's say, engagement, right? So the fact that we have and the client was the government itself. So the fact that we have the airport, the 80% of the airport operations were cargo makes a lot of sense. Like, what if we test waters on something that has economical connection with the transportation? Dubai, one of the phenomena of the urban design, decoded phenomena that we look in here, Dubai is 5 hours away flight-wise to the 65% of production of the world, Africa, Middle East, a little bit mid-Asia, etc. So in a radius of 5 hour flight, which is quite like 747 cargo, like DHL or even Post and etc., they're bringing goods back and forth to the region, right? So it's kind of like a very active, believe it or not, active hub. It's like, what is defeating the sense of Dubai, just skyscrapers and buildings and consumption. This is more like, how do we get a working area that the whole development around will benefit from, right? So this 1 million square meters of development happens to be the hub of bringing work, multifunctional city development, and etc., giving and generating employment for that area. That at the moment it's empty. So here, rather than we just got the competition, we just got the first prize. This is when I was in Fuxas, Studio Fuxas in Rome, but beyond the building itself, this is what the purpose of the building is: articulating an airport. There is somehow was neglected the development of that area in the South Dubai, right? So compensated everything that you know from Al Sea, from Ras Al Khaimah, from all this kind of like Dubai is a patchwork on Resi. Some of you have been there. It's like how difficult. You have one building next to each other, but you have to really drive like 25 minutes just to get across and to get the other building. So that was somehow bringing in for the first time a local policy of compactness. You really want the south of it to be more walkable, a little bit like that, and intent in the design district in Dubai. But how do you create people that have 7, 10, 15 minutes walking distance from the workplace to the living area? And what's the engine of that work entity was a little bit the airport, and let's use the airport and the maximization of that. Okay, layer one. So we supersede that. We convince the government that this land could be probably developing that in those realms. And this kind of like a hybrid between exhibition and expo center was called the Dubai Global Connect entity. So now it's when the layer of architecture starts, but we wanted to create something that somehow was getting the premises on pedestrian connections in the city and all these buildings. This is just half of the development. It was mirror. It was 1 million square meters of development happens to be possible, right? So we have all kind of sorts like ecosystem buildings, let's say, like they have one of the premises work like walkable distances on the most severe weather in summer, like now, like 15 in the shadow and humidity. And anyway, so buildings were kind of like hover over to create this platform of shadows, if you will. And but somehow I'm skipping the architectural part, but somehow it's possible to do this kind of a network on other territories. I'll show you a little more what we have done in Saudi. Another of these kind of like discoveries, let's say, and this is in the city of Hangzhou, 22 million city in the western of Shanghai. Not too long ago, this was a rice field area, and the government wants to expand. Let's see if I can find the sketch. Okay, the government wants to find a way to. There was another social phenomenon here. A lot of like Chinese, young Chinese back then, early 20s, late 30s, were moving abroad just to gain knowledge and repatriate themselves back to China not too long ago. So this international Chinese profile citizen was demanding a place to be in the city, right? So like you want to have the benefit of like being connected. For some of you might know, and I'm making samples of that, but like the center of Berlin or the center of like Frankfurt, the center of like European cities that might have high density, but at the same time connectivity. This is a private developer. It's not the government, but us as a hinge between consulting the city what the development could be and consulting towards the private developer what is that thing that needs to be done here. So we have a metro station. That's the only thing that 8 years ago it was somehow under development, and we're saying like why don't we create a city that will somehow give the reflection of what these new global Chinese they might have co-working space experience. They might have all they call it the benefit of like one step to reach exchange. That was probably the primary element, like exchange with a lot of people and coming over and not isolated, not to drive, etc. A place that they can coexist with the other counterparts, right? So the density again was one of the premises here, and I'm gonna accelerate. So this FAR was
Luciano,
7.2. Yes.
sorry, I
Yeah.
really hate to interrupt, but in the interest of time, I think we can take this up later on if we have
Okay.
time.
No. It's perfect. No.
Then
I'm more than happy. I'm more than happy. I'll stop here, and I think we might get a hint of what some of the interests and the practice that we have. Okay. Thank
yeah.
you.
Thank you so much again for that
Mhm.
insightful journey of bridging architecture and urban design and highlighting the challenges of the urban scale. And your introduction to the decoded urban opportunities was really grounded in deep site understanding, comparative analysis, and scenario planning, which enables us, I think, to uncover hidden value, identity, and potential in urban projects worldwide. With that note, I think I'll like to welcome our next speaker, Sandhya Rao. Sandhya is a senior lecturer at Institute of Smart City and Management, Ho Chi Minh, and the co-founder of City Lab, whose focus of research is urban conditions and the nuances of the city. She's actively involved in urban development projects and urban initiatives. I'll pass on the mic to you, Sandhya, now.
Hello, Sanchao. Very nice to meet you all. Very good morning. Luciano, thank you. Wonderful presentation. Maybe we'll take up a few dialogues at the end of all of our speaking is done. So just to add, thank you, Akanksha, for that quick introduction. I know we have to keep up time, but I'll just take about 2 minutes to introduce about a little bit about me. I'm an urban designer, very much studied and grew up in Bengaluru, my hometown. And currently, I work at a capacity of senior lecturer with the UEH, that's University of Economics in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. And I also handle projects, which is with the Allied Institute with UEH, that's Institute of Smart City and Management. I think what I'll do is I'll probably cut straight to using some of the slides. It's easier to talk and explain sort of what we do. Like, let me just share screen. Just a moment. I think we came right to the end. So sorry. Just you all are getting a quick review already. Let's begin here. I hope I'm audible and my voice, everything is okay?
Yes, all good.
Perfect, fine. Again, glad to be presenting in this webinar. So I work currently at the Institute of Smart City and Management. We are an institute which is affiliated with University of Economics in Ho Chi Minh City. We work at an intersection of research, education, technology, and design. So we are like one of the privileged, lucky few, I would say, who get to do a bit of all. Also, sometimes very stressful to do a bit of all. But however, I mean, that's the fun part of working in an urban landscape, I would say. So Institute of Smart City and Management was officially established in 2020. And from there, we focus on creating value and creating partnerships with the local authority as well as our global partners to come up with innovative solutions for urban problems. So this is a quick overview of what UAH looks like. It's a multidisciplinary university with multiple divisions under it, and ISCM is one that gets to also do a bit of practice. So when we speak of co-creation and a collaborative approach, it sits in the heart of how we would like to build and design our cities. And we at ISCM believe thoroughly in bringing a shared authorship in designing and creating any new city. So we have often worked out of a comprehensive model, and this is where we began. I think one of our first models looked at participation and stakeholders right at the center of how we could reimagine the smart cities or the planned cities that were happening or getting designed in Vietnam. This was the first model that we operated out of, where we looked at various issues and silos that would interconnect and bring together stakeholders and participation and feed in that shared knowledge into the other realms. Following which, one of our very proud, I would say, contributions to our city operations was a living lab, which is still a project that's in progress, where we looked at co-creation as the centric idea, where we looked at engagements of citizens who would come together. And this living lab would allow researchers, contributors, funding agencies to all come together and sort of looked at various projects and also plugged in the authorities to look at capacity building and training. Further from which, of course, our models got a little more complex when we looked at various other topics. And this is one of the projects that I'll also be talking about in the future. That's the city branding and the smart tourism project that we worked out for Vung Tau City. And the next one is the digital transformation model, which we developed for the Ho Chi Minh City. This specifically looked at capacity building and training of public authority. And then these are the two models which are ongoing research that we are working on at ISCM. The first one is, the first model on the left that you're looking at is the Applied Technology University Education model, where again, we are looking at inclusive smart city design. Through education, we are looking at how to engage co-creation and to bring together a practice which is more collaborative, even for our educators and research. And the next one that you're looking at is an exhaustive framework that we are trying to put together with the local authorities. Currently, this is where we stand. This is like an overall co-creation model that we have developed for our country as Vietnam as a case. Over here, if you observe, you see public and people. Public over here is actually authority because they are called the public representatives or the people's committee. And under the people are the community and citizens and all the beneficiaries. And in the center, we have the initiator and the user who actually trigger any of these engagements. So this is the model that we currently operate out of. And this is what it looks like when we present it to the local stakeholders and the other beneficiaries who are involved in design. Now, all this looked theoretically really nice, but how it works in reality is something a lot more different. So I would like to show you how this model was taken and adopted in two specific cases. I would like to give a disclaimer right in the beginning. I'll not be able to show many maps and outcomes because it involves a bit of seeking permission, and that takes a little bit more time from my end, which I didn't have currently. So I would just be showing you the process and what I'm allowed to present. So in co-creation approach, these are the projects that we're currently working on, and these are all long-term projects. So at the bottom, the 5 colors that you're looking at are the action items that we engage in through co-creation, where we have living platform or even forming a collaborative platform, etc. And these are applied on at various stages for each of our projects. So if you could just look at one project, that's the living lab model. We run it as a living lab. So there is actually a physical lab where people can come and connect. And there is also a collaborative platform where people can come and exchange ideas. And then there is also information sharing and promoting transparency, which we believe is the core of co-creation, which we look at it only in a few stages and not through the overall project. So this is how we map most of our projects, where we think that the data has to be available to people who want to participate, but at only critical levels. Moving on to the first project, where I would like to show you the model that was adopted by us. This is to bring together overall branding strategy and smart tourism development ideas for Vung Tau City in Vietnam. So Vung Tau is a very vibrant coastal city. A lot of people go here during the weekends to sort of spend time, and it's a very leisure town. This is about 3 hours drive away from Ho Chi Minh City, which is in the south. Over here, there were two phases that are currently completed. That's the research phase and the implementation phase. During the research phase, university and the research institutions came together to be the initiator. And the people of Vung Tau and the authorities and tourists became the users or the benefactors. And during the implementation stage, the research institutions and the local authorities joined together to be the initiator of this program. What we did right at the beginning was looked at an overall vision of what they want the city to develop. And this also aligned with the larger national interests for adopting even the green growth policy. I think in COP28, Vietnam pledged to be a net zero nation by 2050. So that becomes the larger alignment. And we had subsequent alignments which were of the local authority interest. So this milestone or this roadmap which was created became the core of how we can bring together various agencies to collaborate. And these milestones are something that were done over many, many workshops and interactions with the authority. And then our co-creation platform became a centric connector with a lot of other agencies coming together, and a lot of other ideas also come together. Now, how is all of this envisioned? I would like to just quickly open this link for you all. This is still a beta version of what we are doing, but I think, okay, just a second. Yeah. I hope you all are able to see my screen. So I think, so this is the interactive platform that we built. And what happens over here is all this interactive platform has people who can contribute to it through different authorities and through different agencies. And one of it is the Co-Creation Foundation. When we talk about co-creation, we only speak about an event or a particular engagement, but here we are looking at it as a long-term foundation. So what we are trying to establish over here is a future connect for a city, where people could actually physically come together and contribute to the ideas. And this is one of the first centers that we are envisioning to be built. Following which, this is actually a referential image from Busan, where this is like a smart village center that's in Busan, which is currently being operated. And we want to envision and build a similar center over here in Vung Tau, where people could have a repository data center where they can come and get free access to some of the data that they need. Again, you either have to be a collaborator or an initiator to be a part of this program. And this is the current facility that's existing in Baria Vung Tau, where a lot of statistical data is being collected through digital formats. And these state-of-the-art meeting rooms will be much more equipped. And we also would be looking at digital platforms to integrate availability of a lot of data, etc. So this is like a physical space where we are envisioning co-creation could happen actively and also involve people's engagement. Besides of that, any other initiative that we envision, for example, these are just some of the maps. I can't go completely into the website. I'm just showing some ideas that we have put together. So any new strategy that would come at the city level all gets integrated into this one platform. So you will be able to see different sort of ideas that people are coming together to put. And this is also available to the investors and the other benefactors who would like to get involved. So this is one of the first beginning of our, like a multi-layered approach towards co-creation. And this tool sort of helps us to bring together many ideas and also envision the same. Just a second. Think a bit of a glitch. I'll probably use this. Okay. So that was about how we made an interactive tool out of the co-creation platform that we envisioned. The second project that I would be talking about is only a part of our entire project approach. This is only the vision development of a four-phased project in Quang Nam province in Vietnam, which is in the center. So just to give you all an idea, I hope my screen is visible because I switched on to another. Okay, perfect. Quang Nam province is actually in the center, right in the center of Vietnam, the red dot that you see. And within Quang Nam, we have provincial, like about 17 provincial states, and out of which Tam Kỳ is the city which we are operating out of. Tam Kỳ is a beautiful coastal town with the sea on one side and a beautiful river, Chung Pang, on the other side. And in between is this nice, very beautiful hamlet, which has just about 500 to 600 local residents, and you have about 1,000 visitors who keep moving on and off. And this is actually a famous mural village. So over here, one of the first stages through which we engaged with the citizens is to actually uplift their economy, as well as to work with them for a newer vision for this particular town. And our first engagement with the city was to actually do our field research and data collection. The reason why I picked this project was this is us directly working with the People's Committee of Vietnam. And there were many new learnings for us also. If you see the first image, it actually is the first public engagement that we had with the citizens and the users. Typically, what happens here is all the meetings with the citizens or the community can happen in designated spots. And this is one of the People's Committee building, Community Hall, where the number of participants, who gets to participate, and the type of engagement, everything is pre-decided. So nothing is left to imagination. All we need to seek approval for these meetings, and we also need to be very clear what is the type of engagement that we would like to have and what is the content that we are going to use. So all this preparation needs to be very thorough, and we put in at least about 6 to 8 weeks prior work to make sure that all the approvals are bought, because nothing happens ad hoc. We cannot just go and say that we are going to conduct this meeting and people can come together, including ensuring equal participation of men and women. Everything has to be made clear before we hold a meeting like this. And usually a local authority also gets to be a part of this. And there is a very sequential manner in which we have to do this. But the good part is they're open to newer ideas. So in our first leg of field research and data collection, we went about collecting our data through drones and 3D scanning, etc. But we came back to the community to make sure that whatever we have collected and understood is good or is correct. So their validation meant a lot to us, because what we understood out of the spatial data from the drone imaging may perhaps not be exactly the same as what they understand. So there was a lot of back and forth that happened. In fact, in our drone imaging, there was one area that showed up as a very dense forest, and it happened to be a graveyard. So this information exchange, is very critical to us, because this engagement is like the start of us coming together to create something. After which, a lot of maps are created as usual. I think you're all familiar with these maps and statistics, where we pull out the land use efficiency and how we gather data, etc. From here on, even during the diagnostic stage, that is our analytical stage, we do have public engagement to show and seek advice from them if our analysis is in the right path. Because what we might think as a strength or an opportunity might actually in fact be a threat or a weakness to them. Again, the same process is followed, where we put together a document to make sure that we have the public engagement announced, and we also ensure that the number of participants come together, etc. Akanksha, how are we doing on time?
Well, I was going to request you to wrap it up in a minute.
1 minute. I'm going to jump to the end. I think this is. I'll just quickly move to the slides. Just 2 minutes. All these are our results of strategic vision working workshop. one quick thing, we did generate these maps together with the community with basic symbols of depicting what they want, like trees, water features, etc. And this is, I think I will wrap it up with this. Maybe I can keep the reflections and conclusions towards the end. Is that okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Okay. All right. Thank you. I think we'll stop here. I'll come back with some of my observations maybe at the end. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Sandhya, for this enlightening presentation on co-creation, co-creation frameworks and tools, and how they translate into real-world impact. I think the case studies on Wungtao was really compelling to see how it transitions.
Thank you.
I would now like to invite our next speaker, Kritika Shah. Kritika is a research fellow at the National University of Singapore and has recently completed her PhD in public policy. She is interested in the governance of smart cities and exploring the role of both governments and technology companies in the adoption of advanced technologies and defining the trajectory of inclusive development. Kritika, over to you.
Hi,
Just to
Akanksha.
ensure we have a bit of time for discussion at the end, I would really request you to keep the presentation.
I'll keep my presentation under 15. I have another appointment after this, so I may have to leave. Once the 1.5 hour session was scheduled. So I'm sorry about that. I'll share my screen and just let me know if you can see the presentation cleanly, and I'll start off straight with the PowerPoint. Okay.
It's still loading. Yeah, can see it.
Can you see it in full screen view? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. So hello, everybody. I'm Kritika, as introduced by Akanksha. I'm a research fellow at the Center for Trusted Internet and Community at the National University of Singapore. I will be talking today on my initial journey from moving from architecture to urban planning to now mostly policy design. Fair warning to the audience, I do nothing spatial right now. It's purely policy design and theory. So this might be a bit different than some of the other presentations. I think I echo a lot with what Sandhya was speaking in her work, but this would be a more theoretical leaning towards understanding smart cities. A quick introduction on about myself. I'm an architect trained at Bengal Engineering and Science University in Shibpur. I graduated over a decade ago in 2012. I worked for a few years with Abhikram, with architect Nimish Patel in Ahmedabad on varying projects, mostly architectural, a little bit of research. Then moving on to a degree in urbanism from TU Delft. This was between 2015 and 17. And that's where my interest in urban policy got spiked a bit. We were doing a lot of design. There was emphasis on collaborative design.
Sorry for interruption. Can you please share the full screen? It's not the full one. It's the other one.
So that's what I was worried about. Hold on. Yeah. Is it better now?
Yes. Perfect.
Yes. Great. Okay. Perfect. I was. Okay. So what I was saying was, yes. Then in Delft was where I was exposed to a little bit more in terms of collaborative design, studio work, a little bit different culture in terms of approaching urbanism as well. And that's where my interest in urban policy as the underlying foundation for urban design and urban planning got interesting. I then moved on to doing my PhD at Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. This was also at National University of Singapore. And I worked mostly on understanding smart cities, how smart cities are governed, what are the present challenges, and mostly on how we can design very inclusive smart cities. Right now, I'm doing something, again, very different. So my focus is still policy design, but I'm now doing policy design for governing information and media in this line. So again, moving a little bit away from spatial in that regard. I do want to give a quick primer on policy design to the audience. Policy is basically whatever governments choose to do or not to do. It is a very broad understanding. It encompasses everything from laws, regulations, government programs, bureaucratic processes, procedures, etc. But it is inherently a problem-solving approach. We are looking at certain problems which crop up on the agenda, and policymakers, government officials, other actors, collaborators, we are all trying to solve these problems. So basically, we want to achieve a certain thing, which is the goal, and we want to understand what are the different means we can use to achieve said goal. We can also visualize policy design in terms of a policy cycle, which is you have problem recognition, we have the proposal of solutions, we have a choice of solution, we put these solutions to in effect, and then we monitor results. So looking at it, it is design in a way, but it's just visualized and understood very differently. It goes through a process, it has a life cycle which it goes through, and it has varying components. I will not go into very theoretical detail here, but you can dissect a policy into broad 6 components, which I'll try to illustrate through the smart city investigation of goals, objectives, its settings, the policy means through its instruments, how the mechanisms work, and how we can calibrate said instruments to suit the goal. But why smart cities? Why did I choose smart cities as to sort of test out how policy design would work in this environment? Now, smart cities are everywhere. They are broadly seen as a very popular model of urban development. Obviously, in India, we do have a smart city mission. We also have one in Singapore, which is the Smart Nation. There's an ASEAN Smart City Network, which I'm sure Sandhya would have also seen to a varying degree. We have European smart cities, several of them across in the Middle East, in Korea as well. But mostly they are connected with the involvement of technology companies and technologies in itself. So companies such as Samsung, Cisco, IBM are also very heavily involved in this. So this is why, so I work with a very broad definition of smart cities. So this is the broad definition I work with, which is where we have investments in human and social capital. We have traditional and model communication infrastructure, but at the same time, while we are targeting a high quality of life, we are also focusing a lot on participatory process. But why is governing smart cities so important? So what happens is the technology advances at a far faster rate than the policies to govern them. This is what we call in policy design universe a pacing problem. We also have a lot of information asymmetry where tech companies are not that forthcoming in terms of sharing information, sharing how the processes work. There is also increased corporatization. So private companies are developing most of the tech solutions. So there are questions of whether they are actually neutral, whether they serve private purposes, or do they serve public good? And there are varying regulatory challenges where governments increasingly find it very difficult to design policies that are robust and can safeguard vulnerable people. This is where inclusive smart cities become very key, because any poor policy decisions in this area can exclude large sections of the society from accessing very basic, very essential urban services. And this is where my interest in the topic sort of emerged. And for us, the broad understanding of inclusive smart cities are a more accessible environment, which while improving the delivery of public services, also focus on accessible digital technology, human-centered design, which involves stakeholder participation and can actually meet the need of the local population. And this is the intersection I sort of work with. Smart cities intersecting with urban innovation, which is mostly managed by tech companies, but at the same time balancing inclusive development. And in today's presentation, I would like to sort of showcase this through Singapore Smart Nation program. This is part of a paper which was co-authored with Professor Aras Taiha, who's a faculty at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, and was published sometime last year, around 6 months ago. So in this paper, I'm trying to understand how Singapore is designing its public policies for smart cities, especially focusing on how their policies are leaning to be more adaptive in nature. So what is Smart Nation Singapore? Smart Nation Singapore is a very comprehensive smart city package where we have 3 arms, which is of digital, and they are seeking digitalization across digital government, economy, as well as society. And the idea is to harness technology to effect transformation across a variety of sectors. Why should we look at Singapore? Well, it can be considered as a very influential case study. So it does rank very highly in smart city indices. Perhaps not the best way to measure smart city success, but a way to measure our smart city success in any case. And it often acts as a leading sort of a role model in the region. So policy successes here will tend to get replicated in other jurisdictions. And in my, as I said, in my research question, I'm trying to understand how these policy packages are envisioned. How are we combine? How is Singapore designing policies? How are they combining them for best possible result? Because the policy doesn't exist in the silo. They're always interacting and sort of inducing change with other policies. So this is sort of the broad I wanted to see what they were doing right and what they were doing wrong. I'll not go into details on my research questions. And how did I do this study? I did talk to a lot of policymakers here, but mostly I focused on secondary desk research. Do bear in mind this was done mostly towards the lag end of the pandemic, and the pandemic the regulations lasted here a lot longer than they did in other parts of the world. So interacting with people was difficult on ground. But I mostly explored all the policy documents which were publicly available on Smart Nation. We looked at key speeches, parliament discussions, forum discussions, participatory models, amongst others. And we wanted to test this through an analytical framework to understand and dissect. So the three elements were broad general information about the policy, who issued it, when was it issued, the different policy strategies, so the policy goals, and the different means, or what we would call in policy lingo, policy instruments. And this is sort of, we tried to map and dissect the policy packages here. Again, I'm not going to go too much into detail, and this is very policy theory heavy, but there are different types of policy instruments. Not all of them are the same. So we have very authority-based instruments, which are regulatory instruments. So you either find you can sort of restrict somebody from doing an action or prevent somebody from doing an action. You have incentives. So, you offer subsidies or fee reductions. So those are incentive tools. You have capacity tools where, you're offering training programs for government workers, for other officials to upskill themselves. You have symbolic tools, which are mostly advertisements and information campaigns. And then we have learning tools, which are more collaborative in nature. So you're doing program evaluations, participatory feedback, amongst others. And similarly, there are varying types of interactions. Again, I'm not going to go into detail, but I'm going to mostly focus on these two, which is the facilitation and synergy, where two tools, policy instruments, sort of interact and work with one another in a positive way to affect the policy outcome. So this is what we did. We sort of dissected the policy instruments into various categories. So digital society, economy, and government had different policy goals, different policy objectives, and varying policy instrument interactions. We wanted to see how they were placed. So we see that they are mostly evenly spaced, ranging from 24 to 42% roughly across the three strategies. So it's not that one was receiving less attention than the others. In terms of ministries, there was a Smart Nation office which was established here, and that took on the bulk of the policies. But other ministries such as information, transport, defense, national development, they also were active participants. And in terms of timeline as well, we see that all the three strategies were sort of equally placed across the timeline. So it was not that so broadly speaking, all three strategies worked concurrently at the same time. It was not that one was in focus at one particular time versus the others. So a very comprehensive package in that sense. Quickly going on to more results, what we observed was interesting was all the three policy goals work with one another. So, for example, both digital economy and digital government needed a digital literate populace. So digital society became important for this first two goals to succeed. And similarly, both digital economy and digital government were formulated in such a way, their visions were formulated in such a way that they were mutually beneficial to each other. So in this way, I would say that the policy goals became very tight-knit and the program became very comprehensive and worked well with one another at the vision level. In terms of policy objectives, when we go down a level, each policy objective in digital government, economy, and society had a direct connection to some element of inclusive development, whether it be social development, social inclusion, economic inclusion, environmental, spatial, or political inclusion. I would say at this stage, there was very limited emphasis on spatial inclusion. a lot of the planning in Singapore is government driven and is government managed. So there was not an explicit discussion on spatial inclusion. Also, not a lot of explicit discussion on political inclusion as well. And we'll get to that a little later. In terms of variation of policy, should I wrap up so quickly?
Sorry, yeah, if you could wrap up in a minute or two.
I'll wrap up in a minute. I'll take 2 more minutes. So in terms of variation in policy instruments, again, we see a lot of leaning towards symbolic instruments versus learning. So little less feedback, little less participation, mostly evaluative at this level. But there are more movements towards becoming so and so. So now this is, I would say, I would like to wrap up with a couple of these diagrams. Here is where we see how policy packages were interacting. So we have, for example, establishment of a regulatory sandbox or smart housing estates. But these were not just established in isolation. There were also a lot of forums and workshops conducted with the residents, which were learning instruments. There was a digital app which was launched to get feedback directly from the citizens. There was also sort of co-creation and sort of, I would call, social groups being established which would work with the citizens. All of this is working in synergy and facilitation with one another. So it's a very intricate policy design, which sort of comes together and works towards one policy vision. Similarly, there were other examples in terms of, let's say, partnering with tech companies. So here with Google, it was not that they just partnered with Google. There was also training workshops set up to sort of train the local population. There was skills training, ignition training. There were establishment of regulatory sandboxes. All of this were sort of working either in facilitation or in synergy with one. And so this is, I would wrap up here very quickly. What I would place Singapore right now is in a very optimal adaptive design phase. So you have a lot of these synergistic and facilitative interactions. And this allows Singapore to sort of calibrate its policy tools at a much more fine grain rather than at a macro level, which allows for a more adaptive, a more inclusive approach. It is still in its infancy, I would say, at least in terms of inclusion. But there are certain indications on where it can go. So we have a high variation of instruments. We have high synergistic and facilitative mixes, so already in the right direction. And in the new Smart Nation 2.0 release this year, we see a lot more actually emphasis on learning instruments, a lot more collaboration and participatory instruments. I will end this presentation in saying that we must be very careful of what we take from Singapore as lessons. So it is a very unique city-state. It has a single level governance structure, which is very different from, let's say, what Sandhya presented in Vietnam, what we have in India. So taking lessons from this city-state nation needs to be taken with a pinch of salt. And I said there is very limited discussion yet on political, environmental, spatial inclusion. A lot of focus on social and economic inclusion, which I would say is not surprising at least at this juncture. So that's it. That's me. Thanks, Akanksha, for keeping time.
Thank you, Kritika. Thank you for walking us through a shift from architecture and urban planning to policy design, and for also briefly illustrating how smart city governance can shape inclusive, impactful urban development through thoughtful policymaking. On that note, I'd like to pass on the baton to our next speaker, Manushi Jain. Manushi Jain is the co-founder and director at Sponge Collaborative and has actively worked on a wide range of projects around the world, such as Boston, New York City, Singapore, Mumbai, Bangalore, Afghanistan, France, and Croatia. Her areas of focus and research include urban housing, hyperdensity, and resiliency in urban development. The floor is yours, Manushi.
Thank you so much, Akanksha. Am I audible?
It would be really helpful. Yeah, it would be really helpful if you can wrap it around.
Yes, I'll try my very best. I think I have a very visual presentation, so I would request everybody to pay attention to your screens. I'll just start sharing the screen now. Yes, so is my screen visible?
Not yet. I think it's loading. Yeah, we can see it now.
Okay, great. So good morning, everybody. Very quickly, we've seen a range of global case studies, but today I'm going to be focusing a lot about Indian cities and how we can mainstream interdisciplinary approaches in building climate resilience in Indian cities. Now, the question is, why do we need interdisciplinary approaches or a collaborative design approach? So we are living in the day and age of climate change, and we are seeing a lot of issues like flooding, heat, drought, about, and it's becoming a common topic in every household. And you're having increasing issues of solid waste management, sewage disposal in Indian cities. And the question is, why is that happening? It's because of rapid urbanization, because of lack of infrastructure upgrades, all of these types of things that our cities are dealing with on a daily basis. And the rise of this interdisciplinary approach is more and more relevant now because we are seeing recurring events of climate change, and they are becoming more and more frequent. And therefore, it's very important to start looking at climate adaptation, looking at sustainable urban development, and looking at community involvement in the process and in the way in which we're building our cities. So that is the juncture at which Sponge Collaborative has been formulated. We're a young interdisciplinary planning and design firm that work in the synergy of ecology, community building, and systems thinking to resolve the complex issues that our cities are facing today. We have offices in Chennai and Bangalore. And just a little background about myself. I'm an architect and urban designer. I studied at Pratt Institute in New York, and I've practiced with Sasaki Associates in Boston. My other co-founders have also been from there. And together we have built this interdisciplinary firm which is truly interdisciplinary because we have landscape architects, urban designers, sustainable urban development experts, sociologists, all of them in-house, and we collaborate with hydrologists, ecologists on our projects because we believe that the power of collaborative design is to look at how different disciplines can come together to create solutions for these complex problems. And we do this at multiple scales. So today I'm going to quickly demonstrate how in Indian cities we've been able to establish bringing this approach of building resilience through nature-based solutions, blue-green infrastructure, the Sponge City approach, taking all of these principles and tools and applying it at various scales to see how this can impact and help build resilience in Indian cities. So diving right in, first we're going to look at how interdisciplinary approaches can help build resilient cities. And to give a little background about this, since 2018, Sponge Collaborative has been advocating for this approach, but we are a post-pandemic born firm. So we were formalized only in 2021. And then we began to kind of push the understanding of why climate change is kind of impacting our cities. And the understanding here is that our cities are rapidly growing and becoming impermeable, and therefore there's increased runoff, there's flooding. Even though we have water surplus, we're having a lot of water scarcity, and these types of prevalent issues are occurring in almost all Indian cities. And the idea here is, as an interdisciplinary practice, how can you start leveraging your streets, your buildings, your open spaces to build more resilience in a way that during a cloudburst event or during a climate risk event, you're able to at least ensure that your infrastructure is functioning in a way that it mitigates flooding, it's helping in aquifer recharge, it's delaying the runoff, you're increasing rainwater harvesting. But it's not only doing just that, but creating a lot of co-benefits like, increasing biodiversity, helping in enhancing the microclimate, how are you improving the air quality, how are you doing public placemaking in the process of this. So the understanding is that how do you take this interdisciplinary system-oriented approach and apply it to infrastructure development, helping in, increasing urban biodiversity, enabling urban mobility, how are you building the communities here, and how are you also in the process of it doing value capture in real estate. So I'll give you one specific case of Chennai and why this is so significant to Chennai. So like many cities, Chennai is also rapidly urbanizing, and it is losing a lot of its open spaces and its water bodies. And therefore, the green and blue systems are completely dilapidating. As you can see, like the WHO standard is 9 square meter per capita, but we only have 0.81 in Chennai. So there's an increasing need for better health and well-being, that we start protecting our ecosystems, we start restoring some of the ecological functions, we start to enhance what we have existing within our urban fabric, and we introduce or we construct new blue-green infrastructures that can support this. So we began this exercise where the Chennai city is currently developing its third master plan. And very interestingly, the city has now decided to undertake an open space study, one of the first of such studies in India, which will start looking at how climate resilience can be built through open spaces, not just from the lens of ecology, but also from mobility and civic spaces. And we are doing this with a very rigorous multi-criterion GIS analysis and stakeholder engagements, both with public consultation as well as government stakeholders, and devising an entire map of what are the blue-green assets and what are the land use hazards and risks that the city is facing. So the idea here is to build a nature-based ecological framework which is risk sensitive and therefore can help enable sustainable urban development. And the entire project will look at how we vision the project, how are we developing strategies for it, and what are the action items or guidelines that the city can undertake to ensure that their open spaces are improved and enhanced over a period of time. Now, this is at the metropolitan scale. Jumping down to a neighborhood scale or a precinct scale, we started looking at how each of these cities are made up of different basins. And, within Chennai itself, we have 5 or 6 basins. So we are focusing on the Kosasthalaya basin for this project. This is an interesting project because cities are very used to doing infrastructure in a certain way and looking at how concrete is the solution for all. But here we are promoting the idea of the sponge city approach, which is about using nature and leveraging nature to help build resilience. So the idea here is to basically look at an entire process or model in which we had experts from IIT Madras that were hydrologists, we had carer that were ecologists, and a collaboration of team that came together to kind of create sponge framework or a blue-green infrastructure framework for a 340-acre precinct. And we began with understanding the land cover first, citing what are the different kinds of nature-based solutions that can be integrated in the city. This was all quantified and done in a very data-driven method, so we could convince the city for this way forward. And we did a lot of ground proofing, we did a lot of stakeholder consultations to kind of take forward this idea. And we created a dynamic hydrological model which looks at a sub-catchment level. So what's very important while addressing these urban issues is to look at data from different scales. And we did that whilst we also simulated it for different scenarios. So as we know that in current situations, cities are experiencing more and more cloudburst events or extreme rainfall events. So we wanted to see how our framework could also perform during these issues. So the project itself was an ADB funded project where Chennai's northern region was for the first time getting a stormwater drain. And the stormwater infrastructure is usually designed at 2-year return period storm event based on the CPHEO manual. Here our hypothesis was whether the same infrastructure that has been constructed can be upgraded without pouring more money into concrete, but leveraging our open spaces and streets and our urban fabric to build the resilience by integrating nature-based solutions. And we kind of did that within this neighborhood, which was actually highly impervious. About 53% of this entire region was impervious. And but it still had a lot of open spaces and streets that could be used to create perviousness. And then we built this large sponge framework for it, which was looking at integrating toolkits like rain gardens, swales, micro interventions and macro interventions that could kind of help build and transform the fabric of the city. So just for example, in a primary street, which looks like this, in India, a lot of streets don't have sidewalks. There's just a stormwater drain that becomes the sidewalk, or the shoulder area is used for like hawking or parking. And how we can kind of streamline the carriageway, how can we bring in more greening, how do we introduce rain gardens and delay the runoff from the streets, and therefore saving the critical infrastructure from being flooded. So just some examples of how it performs. You can also take this principle and apply it to open spaces, be it small, medium, or large open spaces. And we created a framework on how cities should start thinking of their smaller spaces, larger spaces, and what are the different interventions that can come in. How do we simplify it in terms of just, how do you amend soil? How do you just start planting more trees? And just by doing these small things, you're able to kind of, you see the section on top and the bottom, completely transform your urban fabric, and it just starts performing a lot better in terms of managing its water. And this particular project, we were able to, stormwater project was able to secure funding from National Disaster Management Authority and is now moving towards implementation because of the way and how interdisciplinary this entire project was. It was not just about resolving the issue of infrastructure, but it was about placemaking, it was about increasing biodiversity, it was about giving a lot of other co-benefits. And within this entire master plan, we also identified a pilot project, and we kind of demonstrated how a small site could be converted to perform like a sponge park. And within that, the idea was to look at how these sponge parks could be neighborhood commons. They should not just be performing in terms of the blue infrastructure, but how are they becoming habitats for flora and fauna, and how are they helping in healthy living. And we did the entire modeling and simulation and the performance of the site to build the case for why parks should become multifunctional in nature, and why it's important to always look at the green, blue, and the social layer together. This is just how this park would perform during the monsoon event. Now, the sponsity concept is very popular in China, and it has been implemented in many other cities globally. But this was one of the first times we were able to show a proof of concept in Chennai, and this has been tendered for implementation. A very critical component of doing these types of projects is to ensure community integration in the design process itself. And we were able to, really get a lot of positive feedback on this type of an approach, and the community was very interested in seeing how this goes forward. Now, we've looked at the metropolitan scale, kind of how you can take it down towards a pilot scale. But you can apply these interdisciplinary approaches even to doing master planning projects. And I'm going to quickly show you one such project in Hyderabad. This was for the Hyderabad Metropolitan Development Authority. And this was Telangana State Campus for Urban Excellence. And the way we wanted to design this 65-acre campus was to look at how the campus itself could be a model and a living laboratory for smart urbanization. And it looks at the principles of what it means to be a smart urbanization. It leverages the features within the site, where you look at, what are the green corridors, what are the areas that you need to conserve on the site, how do you create a synergy between different kinds of programming, what are the key institutes within the government that you would like to bring together, how are you going to enable the synergies between them, and how does the campus design help do that. So the idea here was that to look at it in a systems oriented approach, where we are kind of creating a campus that can serve as an example for how a smart urbanization should be done in the rest of the city. It was focusing a lot on innovation. It was looking at how we create a loop where we are able to kind of measure dynamics on water, energy, food, and waste, and assess the performance. It was about looking at a very data centric approach to a campus planning, and how the campus could also be monitored. So it was also experimenting a lot in terms of mobility. What are the different kinds of smart mobility options that are available today? How do you encourage more digital wayfinding and data-driven understanding and monitoring of what is the water conservation you're doing? How much energy are you consuming on the campus? So it started to look at how do you explore these types of smart systems in building a campus. And we also wanted to create a really central space within the different universities that we're going to come together here, which is about looking at urban ecology, urban mobility. The thing is, in Indian government, most of these departments work in silos. So we wanted to facilitate a campus in which all of these different departments could come together, along with students, along with, startups, entrepreneurs, along with daily visitors, along with faculty, all of them coming together, and how they kind of activate this entire campus and use it through the entire day, as well as during special events. And we also wanted to demonstrate how the landscape framework is such a critical aspect of the campus. And then, kind of took it into detailing out how the plazas, parks, spaces work. We also went all the way down into architecture, understanding how at the building scale each of these could perform, looking at climate performance, climate efficiency, while designing such institutes in campus. So just some of the visuals I wanted to quickly share. But the idea was to create a circular campus here, where you're looking at how you monitor and how the campus performs in terms of water, energy, waste, as well as food, and how it can be self-sufficient completely. In the last scale, what I want to talk about is how interdisciplinary approaches can help in creating performative public spaces. And we work with...
Sorry to interrupt. If you could wrap up in around a minute or two, please. Thank you.
Yes, this is the last project. Thank you. So in this particular project, this was done with the Chennai Metropolitan Development Authority. This is about 16 acres of land, which is an open space reserve that the city was holding. And this is located a little bit in the periphery, like in the upcoming neighborhoods, and there is a large campus near the site. So as you can see on the right, the entire site was a low-lying wetland. It's north to Porur Lake. And over a period of time, the wetland started diminishing, like we're losing our green and blue systems in the urban fabric. So the idea here was when we were giving the site, what can we do to revive the wetland system? And it was about not just doing that, but also looking at it as why wetlands are critical infrastructures, how they can be social cultural amenities, and how they can be enablers for habitat. So this is what the site looked like when we first arrived. It was completely asphalted and a parking lot for over 1,000 cars. There's a water body on the site that was completely eutrophied and dilapidated, and we have transformed it into a thriving community space, which also performs ecologically as well as hydrologically to help reduce the flooding in the site as well as reduce heat around the neighborhood. And these are just some of the photographs of what the site looked like before, and this is how we were able to transform it today. So this was a rigorous exercise done with all different kinds of experts coming together to help build a living laboratory for nature-based solutions, where we were able to show a proof of concept to the city, and we're able to collect and filter 90% of the stormwater. The hydrological functioning of the site is such a way that all the stormwater from the neighborhood is collected. It's passed through different layers of treatment, which is through nature-based solutions of looking at sedimentation, aeration, phytoremediation. This is what the system looks like implemented on site. And, just a glimpse of how biodiversity has started thriving in these areas, and how nature starts to take over even such dilapidated landscapes once that opportunity is given. And it's in the urban core surrounded by residential schools, institutes. And even during cloudburst, we are seeing how the park starts to perform. The entire park is designed with a 600-meter boardwalk, and the hydroecological functions are kept intact. And it became an urban commons. We're seeing like huge influx of people coming in. So about 85 species of plants were introduced on the site. A dedicated signage strategy was done to educate people about the significance of the wetlands, the different types of species that they're seeing, and why it's important to preserve and conserve them. The entire experience is tied in with a lot of community amenities, with play courts, seating areas, outdoor gym, galleries with educational signages. And this is what it looks like today. I just wanted to show you a small video of how people have been using this park. This is the last bit. Yeah, and we took all of this learning, and we have decide. And the city has also accepted this type of approach now very widely, and we've been helping municipal engineers and urban local bodies kind of build capacity to take this initiative forward and scale it. We've created a large geo database of helping cities prioritize what are the neighborhoods in which you need these types of multifunctional insertions done, and built a manual around it. And we've been very successful in capacity building and helping the government ULBs here to, scale up this initiative. So on this note, I'd end my presentation about how all of these learnings are very circular, where, doing regional planning frameworks, looking at precinct level, getting down to pilot scale always helps in, enabling institutional capacity building. And this has been an ongoing cycle for us at Sponge, and we are very happy to share all of this with you. Thank you so much. I will stop my presentation here.
Thank you, Manishri, for this engaging presentation on mainstreaming collaborative design to build climate resilient cities in India. Your case studies clearly demonstrated how interdisciplinary approach and nature-based solutions can really shape more inclusive, resilient urban futures across various scales. With that, I would like to pass on the virtual stage to our moderator for the session, Sandhya Rao.
Hello all.
Unfortunately, we do not have a lot of time for the moderation. Yeah, we could wrap it up in around 5 to 10 minutes. Thank you.
I think we'll do this moderation a bit different because we have very limited time. And I would just bring in each of the speakers to wrap up and reflect upon what we saw today. And also talk a bit about some of the challenges and limitations and learning experiences through your work. I think that would make it more effective and leave some critical points for everybody to think about. I think let's begin with Luciano. Maybe the floor is open. You could just reflect upon some of the ideas today.
Oh, thank you. Just quite quickly, actually, it's fascinating to see the other people's work, and especially in the spectrum of the disciplines, like so in critical arts and Manushi, like you have tackled all this kind of like frame it beautifully and very clearly, like what has been either for policies or for interaction and monitoring, actually, how the work has progressed in terms of the timeline, right? So it's not only the beautiful submission of the project, but also how do you get engaged into the community. That's something that somehow me as an architect, and then later on in the planner spectrum, that it's quite a lot of design, but it's quite a lot of like detecting elements of the community or detecting elements of the potential of that project that you can insert it and later on see in the process of maturity. I mean, I think we're in that hinge of the whole professional and research spectrum. Like we're not keen only to just to see the delivery, we see the evolution of that. So that's a phenomenon. I mean, for those youngers actually in the audience are like seeing this for the first time. I think the era of the beautiful and fantastic, and we all have a beautiful design, language, and etc. But that doesn't finish that. Actually, that's a departing point ahead. You know what I mean? Like today, actually, the lesson learned is like we all have seen like from the policy creation and perpetuating a little bit the quality of the project and monitoring, for example, and getting the what I just want to bring to the table, if you can bring something, is like what you detected as a potential of a project might or might not be in the brief later on, right? So that's somehow connecting a little bit the cycle, the life cycle of the project in the long run. This is a little bit what actually might synthesize it. Thank you.
Yes, that's true. I think let's quickly bring in Manushi here because I have a little different questions for Kritika. Manushi, for you and your team, what was like the biggest learning moment, and did you like face some limitations? Because I know co-creation or inclusive design can be very research and resource intensive, and to even to scale it and adapt it to bigger or outer regions is very hard. So could you just speak a bit about these?
I think thank you, Sandhya. So it has been a learning curve for us as well because the complexities of Indian cities are very different from what we see globally, and it's also very interdepartmental and interdisciplinary here as well. So like even if you take a street, the sidewalk, the tree planted on the sidewalk will belong to the horticulture. PWD will own a certain part of it. If it is a highways, then the highways owns a certain part of it. It's a very fragmented system that we are working with, and I think that we are truly believe in the power of interdisciplinary approaches or collaborative design because we feel like these cities are facing issues that are so complex that not just as urban designers I feel like that's our role to kind of bridge all of these disciplines together and bring these different experts on board to kind of create a holistic solution, and we've been striving to do that at different scales as part of our practice. In terms of like the type of roadblocks that we faced is, of course, there has been a lot of awareness within the higher levels of bureaucracy in understanding these issues. So, of course, there is an intent here already, which helps us, kind of work towards these types of solutions. But, of course, understanding that our cities will have data constraints, understanding that there will be a lot of different issues when going on ground and implementing. Like, for example, the wetland eco park that I showed you. We didn't know until we got onto site that there was 1 meter of, garbage and debris and landfill on the site when we started excavating the entire site started to transform, and when we started like removing the asphalt. So there's like a lot of uncertainty when it comes to urban realm in India, and you need to like kind of always improvise on that all the time. So I feel like those are some of the things. And in terms of just touching upon governance policy, because we as designers also play a very significant role in how, you know, we are looking at how these regulations kind of shape the cities that we are living in today. So that has also been quite a big learning curve for us, looking at the open space study itself, because that's becoming a statutory land use plan, you know, like going to feed into that as the next step. So, you know, what are the different things that you as a team of experts come together with that can help the city build upon? So I think those have been some of the big learnings that we have had, and we're as a young practice been able to really make long strides in terms of you know, because there is a very consistent interest in building climate resilience. So we've been fortunate to kind of demonstrate it at multiple scales, and we are planning to, you know, continue doing this across other cities in India and see how because each context is very different and the learning has been different. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Very, very, very valid points. I think I'll quickly bring in Kritika. I think we just have about 2 or 3 minutes. Speaking about policy and digitization, nothing better than Singapore to talk about it. But there's always a risk of corporatization or standardizing these digital modes, you know. And what do you think are some of the guardrails that you know, a designer could look at while they're making this digital governance more inclusive? So I would,
yeah, I'll speak of a couple of measures which Singapore has put in place, where at least those seem to be working. The first one is a regulatory sandbox. So, for example, they wanted to test out autonomous vehicles in a particular in Singapore and seek out its viability. They earmarked a place where regulations were laxed. So it was a sandbox to play in that analogy. And where companies were given a little bit more free rein to sort of test out and sort of iron out the kinks before actually launching out into the wider universe of the city. The other would be whenever they are introducing, so they have an in-house government tech department. So which was a big surprise to us coming from different other countries. So yes, there is a Smart Nation office which coordinates everything, which is also a very good thing. But there's an in-house tech company called GovTech, which develops a lot of these. So for example, the contact tracing app during COVID was developed in-house. It was not outsourced to TCS or Google or whoever else was involved. So there is a lot of in-house capacity. Now, where does this capacity come from? So there's a lot of emphasis on training and skill development. This is so, let's say when Singapore partners with Google to develop AI tools and some certain digitization efforts in Smart Nation program, they're also at the same time with Google itself launching training and capacity building workshops. So that its own population, it's the people who are designing the policies for it, using it, are going to modify it further. They're all up to skill in terms of managing the technology rather than the technology managing them. This, I would say, is one of its sort of a good feature in place. The other would be a lot of feedback apps. So there is a lot of feedback taken, but at this point of time, it's mostly exposed. So after the intervention has been in place, which I think in the newer version, they are sort of bringing this participatory feature a bit ahead in the timeline. We'll see where that goes as of now. So that's my 2 cents.
All right, great. I think that sort of brings us to the end of this talk. Very quickly, I feel all the talks have been very thought-provoking, and it leaves us with this hope of creating and co-creating beautiful cities for the future, making it more inclusive, and also where we have platforms for shared intelligence. Akanksha, I don't think we have any time left for audience questions.
Right. Yeah, not really. We would really have loved to discuss more, but unfortunately, we do not really have much time. So I think it'll be good if we can wrap the session.
I think for us, I would just wrap it up by saying, no matter how hard it is to sort of promote inclusive city design, and we all know we can only learn through experience, but I guess that is the need of the hour, and the act of creating and co-creating should never stop. So that is how the future cities have to develop. And whether we are talking about nature-based solutions, whether whether we're talking about digital platforms or preserving the local intelligence and local values. That's what we saw in all three talks, and I hope this session would leave that as a biggest takeaway for all the young designers here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandhya. Thank you. Thank you, Luciano. Thank you, Kritika. Thank you, Manushi. And thank you all for joining in. We will be taking a short break of 10 minutes before our last session of Infinitum 2.0 Catalyze, which will be hosted by my friend and co-convener, Deeban Chatterjee. And I hope to see you all there in 10 minutes. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.